All right, welcome back. Previous section was about the 13 original colonies, 13 British colonies. In this one, we're going to get into some foundations of representative government in the colonies that would kind of carry over into what happens after we are no longer British colonies and move to become American colonies. So, colonial government was based on the principles established in England. The colonists set up governments based on what they knew from the government in England. American colonists, or they were actually British colonists at the time, were part of the British Empire. And early on, they were actually happy to be part of the British Empire. They were, for the most part, just fine being British citizens living in the New World. For reference, when you hear the term Great Britain, it refers to England, Scotland, and Wales. England is just part of Great Britain, but for the purposes of this course, whenever I say English or British, it means the same thing. So, principles of British government, or English government. So, England's monarchy, king or queen, is part of what became known as limited government. This is a very important term that's going to carry on through a lot of this class, and you'll learn even more about it when you take actual government class. But it's the government can't just do whatever it wants. It's not all powerful, and there's a set of laws that restricts it or constrains it. It's based on a term known as the rule of law, which basically means no one's above the law. Both the government and the people are subject to the law, and they've got to follow a set of rules or a set of laws. We see that today in terms of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the laws associated therein. The Magna Carta, this was over 800 years ago at this point, 805 years ago at this point. So English nobles, these were in England, wealthy landowners that had some voice in the government, some voice with the king or with the queen. They, long story short, forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. Now, you may see a question on a quiz or something that asks you why the Magna Carta is important, and an answer choice you'll often see is, oh, it was because it was called the Great Charter. That's not why it was important. That was just what Magna Carta translates to. The reason it's important is the first time that the power of the British monarchy, the power of the British king or the British queen, was limited. First time limits were put on the monarchy, and it guaranteed people certain political rights, such as trial by jury, no taxation without some form of representation. That phrase there should ring a bell in your mind. And protection of the law, under the law, from the law, so on. Process of limited government continued. If you fast forward about 474 years, there was this event called the Glorious Revolution. We'll get more into that later, but it resulted in the English Bill of Rights. Citizens can petition the government, a right to a speedy trial, no cruel and unusual punishment. Those are just some examples of rights or laws or liberties in the English Bill of Rights. Those should sound familiar to you because they helped influence our Constitution and specifically our Bill of Rights here in the U.S. And you'll learn more about those later as well. So what do they have in common? Both the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights serve to protect citizens, British citizens, from interference from the king, from the British government, weaken the monarchy further. That's not meant to sound overly negative, but it's just another way, like I said, to protect the citizens from the king or queen doing whatever they want, and strengthen Parliament. Parliament is England's legislative branch of government. Now, you'll hear different terms. You may have heard of our three branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. Legislative refers to the branch of government that makes the laws. So Parliament is the branch of government in England that makes the laws. It's got two houses or two chambers. One, you've got the House of Lords. It's an appointed house, meaning they're selected. And you've got the House of Commons, which is an elected group, meaning people vote for whoever serves in the House of Commons. These, again, are models for our U.S. Constitution and our government. They would help influence how we set up our government. Also based on the term common law, which basically means there's this idea that the government relies on past legal decisions where there's no formal written law. If you ever watch a TV show where there's some kind of, or a movie where there's some kind of trial going on and they mention the word precedent and they mention a prior case, and that helps drive a decision in the court or in the court case, that's basically what common law is here. You use a past legal decision where there's not a written law, and you help that kind of influence how you move forward. So there's this event called the Enlightenment in the 1600s. Huge changes in philosophies and the way people thought about politics and the way government should function and the power that government should have. John Locke, for our purposes in this class, is the most famous and probably the most important figure from the Enlightenment. When you take government class, you'll learn about some other figures from the Enlightenment that helped influence our government. But for U.S. history, John Locke is number one. Locke believed that all men were born with natural rights that the government can't take away. That language would influence Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. We'll get into that some more later. Also supported what is known as the social contract theory, which basically means you give up some freedoms so that the government can maintain order. If you decided you want to just drive 100 miles per hour up and down Floyd Baker Boulevard, somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to get hurt. But you don't do that because it's not safe and because that's not order. You don't go into a bank and point a gun at someone and demand money. You can, but you'll go to prison. That's not order. That's chaos. You give up some freedoms. I know those are crazy examples, but you give up some freedom so the government can maintain order. So again, John Locke's views would help a lot of people when they're setting up the government, but it also helps people justify what would become the American Revolution that we'll talk about in the next chapter. He had this right of or right to revolution where he basically says if the government fails to serve its role, it should be replaced. And there's some language that we'll see when we talk about the Declaration of Independence that actually kind of echoes that sentiment of the right to or the right of revolution. Self-government in the American colonies. I mentioned salutary neglect in the last section. It's where we are thousands of miles away from England, so we were kind of allowed to govern ourselves within some constraints, within some we had to kind of follow a rule book, and we'll get into that in class a little deeper. But again, most colonists, proud British citizens. They were happy to be British citizens. They didn't need to be forced to obey laws. They were proud citizens. They were happy citizens for the most part. So colonial governors versus colonial legislatures. This is part of the government in the colonies. First example of self-government in the British colonies was Virginia's House of Burgesses. That got mentioned in the last PowerPoint, the last video. It had two houses, two chambers, much like Parliament, one elected by the people and the other appointed by the governor. The colonial governors were supposed to have more power. They were appointed by the king. So the king handpicked that person, that colonial governor, so he's supposed to have more power. However, colonial legislatures were elected by the people. They were chosen by the colonists. So they end up having a little more influence. So you get a lot of tension between these two groups. It's like an arm wrestling match the whole time. So that's colonial government. We'll get more into that in class, in person. If we go virtual, I'll make some more videos and we'll get some online discussions going. This is an assignment we're going to do. You may end up doing this on your own, but ideally we'll do this in class. But you'll pick a colonial region, or you'll do each one. So for each colonial region, you'll draw a color, an appropriate picture that represents important information from that section. So you might pick a crop or something from industry there in one of those colonies. You might pick a key figure, something like that. Then you've got to create an accurate acrostic of or for each of the three regions. An acrostic, for refresher, is where each of the first letters in a word becomes first letter of that line. So an example here, cash crop. You cannot use this example. Cash crop, cotton not important yet, also known as staple crop. Slaves work the land, hot climate, fertile soil, can't be grown in New England. Rice, tobacco, indigo, only grown in South, profit for the gentry. So that's an example of an acrostic, using the letters from the words cash crop. Again, you cannot use that example but that's just a good one. Another thing we may do is British colonies haikus. With this, for each section on your handout that you'll get in class, or you can download from Canvas, you write a haiku, draw a corresponding picture for each of the following items: the southern colonies, the middle colonies or the mid-Atlantic colonies, and the New England colonies. Each picture must have colors large enough to be seen from afar. These will probably end up being displayed in the hallway. If we end up going virtual, we'll do an electronic version of this, and I'll just share it out through Canvas. The haiku is a 3-line poem with a 5-7-5 syllable pattern. You've probably done something like this in an English class before, or even in middle school, or as far back as elementary school. So that's the British colonies. Again, we're going to dive deeper into some of these concepts in class when we're together, and probably in some online meetings if we have to have those. The next section will see us, the next chapter will see us start looking at when the colonists got unhappy being British citizens and decided to have a little revolution, and we'll see why that happened. So you got work to do. These PowerPoints will be in Canvas for you to view without the videos. These videos can be watched as many times as you want, wherever you want, if you just love hearing the sound of my voice. So good luck with the work. Always let me know if you have any questions. And that's chapter 1.